58.
All right, so I think we are live right now. So
Yes.
yeah, so we got a few more minutes. Good morning, everybody. I'm Mr. Joseph McKee. I'm the Pathway to 21 strategist, and I will be conducting a workshop this morning. And we got Miss Trina Cox, who's the coordinator of career services at Kahoma Community College, and we've been partnering together for about the past 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years
Yeah.
to bring these ACT workshops. And so the pandemic has caused us to put a pause on in-person workshops, but we can do it this way right here, virtually. So we're giving everybody a few more minutes to jump on, and we're going to get started. Got about 2 minutes. So grab you some notebook, paper, grab you some pens or pencils. Get ready to take some notes. We're going to give you a game plan on how to get prepared for the test. Uh, whether you're taking it on September 11th or if you're going to take it in October, whenever you're taking it, you can use these tips and these strategies. So let me do a few things. I'm going to share this out on Facebook. All right, it's 9 o'clock, Miss Cox. We are right on time. So again, welcome everybody to ACT Prep. This is a partnership between myself and the Career Services Office at Kahoma Community College. And so what I want to do right now is allow Ms. Trina Cox the opportunity to give a few some information and some pointers and some notes and things about how we're going to conduct the session this morning, and then we're going to get right into it.
Good morning. As Ms. McKee stated, my name is Trina Cox, and I'm the coordinator of career services at Kahoma Community College. And we are thankful for Mr. McKee to give up his Saturday morning to offer this virtual workshop for you all. And one little housekeeping rule, I just ask that you all be respectful with your questions if you have any, and let's get this knowledge.
All right. All right. So it is 9:01, and more people will be joining in. Some people are viewing it on Facebook on our page. Some people are viewing it on YouTube. Uh, so what we want to do this morning is we want to really take the time to share with you some information on how to prepare for the ACT. Oftentimes, when it comes down to this test, we think about what do we need to study? What do we need to review? Well, knowing what to do is one thing, knowing how to do it is something totally different. And so there are a lot of books, there are a lot of ACT prep courses that are available to you. There are a lot of outstanding and great people out there that can assist you with ACT prep. But if you don't have a game plan, if there are not certain elements that are presented in that prep session, you're going to miss out on some things that you need to do that can really help you be successful. Now, success on the ACT is totally dependent upon the individual. Some people want to get just enough to be able to get into college. Some people want to get a high enough score so they can avoid some certain courses. Some people want to get a high score so they can earn scholarships. So depending upon what it is you're trying to do, that's going to determine how much time and effort you put into your ACT prep. So everything that I'm going to give to you today is nothing magical. There's no secret. It's really just practical and logical information that when you put it together, it gives you a game plan. Now, your goal is, or your charge is to take that information, and once you leave here today, go home, sit down, and actually practice every day. Practice as much as you can. Practice, practice, practice. Because the more you practice, the better you're going to become at what it is you're trying to do. All right, so I'm going to take Miss Cox out of the stream for a little while,
Okay.
and she'll be back with us shortly. I'm not going to ban you from the studio. I'm just going to kick you out for a little while, okay?
Okay.
All right. All right, everybody. So what is this, what we're talking about this morning? We're talking about ACT prep. And so the goal is for me to give you a plan to navigate to a 21 on this test. Now, why is it 21? Last year, October of 2020, the average score for ACT participants was 20.6. So about 50%, half of the people that took that test scored a 20.6. So if you score 21, that means you will have scored higher than half of the people that take the ACT. That's pretty good. So we want to focus on that 21. Now, the other reason why I want to focus on 21, we're right here in Mississippi, and a 21 pretty much guarantees that you're going to miss out on some developmental courses as it relates to English and math, because you have to have a 17 on the English section of the ACT in order to take Comp 1. You have to have a 19 on the math section in order to take college algebra. So we want to avoid taking those developmental courses because that extends your time in school, that costs you more money. But the other thing is this, a 21 on the ACT, I strongly suggest you take a look at community colleges, because a 21 on the ACT can get you most time a full ride as it relates to tuition. So I focus on the 21 because 50% of the people that take the test score 20.6. Number 2, the 21 can help you avoid some developmental courses if you're getting the 21 in those English and math sections. And number 3, 21 can help you get scholarship depending on the school you're going to. So as you're navigating your way through this ACT prep, I want you to focus on some things. So once you leave here, you may still go and find additional services or classes to take or resources. But before you do that, I want to give you 5 guiding factors that you should always consider when you're doing ACT prep. These factors, I think, are very important, and this is what people miss out on when they seek out products and services and classes to attend for ACT prep. So the most expensive class isn't always the best one. All right. So you got to look for these factors. Number 1, your ACT prep has to be structured. So it has to be done in a manner that allows you to not only answer questions or do practice questions, but those practice questions must be done as a part of an overall process or an overall strategy. So it has to be structured. You have to be willing to go through this particular section and then do certain things, move to the next section, and then the next section and the next section. So you're actually going to be building along the way. So the structure allows you to stay within certain guidelines and constructs, so you'll have a purpose for what you're doing. So make sure you look for structure. Next guiding factor is it must be process oriented. So we're talking about something that is going to give you a step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, that creates that structure. But it also creates you a guide for you to measure exactly what it is that you're doing. So whatever you're looking at, whatever class, whatever book, whomever you're looking for as far as a tutor, make sure that the ACT prep that they're providing to you is process oriented, and it allows you to conduct the step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, why do we want it to be process oriented? Because everything you do must be intentional. It's one thing to say, I'm going to do some practice problems. It's another thing to understand exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing when you're doing those practice problems. So there's a reason why you want to read those problems. There's a reason why you want to ask certain questions. There's a reason why you want to write in your book. Everything has to be intentional. And being intentional is a part of that process, which is a part of that structure. So when you're intentional, It leads to the fourth factor, skill-based. Everything that you do must be designed to help you develop some type of skill that is going to lead to success on the ACT. Now, for most people, the biggest hurdle on the ACT is the math section. And that math section requires you to have some skills, have some background knowledge on how to add, multiply, subtract, and divide. Well, the only way you can really develop those skills is if you're being intentional about developing those skills. So as you're going through your process, the process allows you to focus on certain skills that will be developed over time. And as you continue to do those things, it's going to be second nature. So it's just like anybody that participates in any extracurricular activity. You have to practice over and over and over again before you get real proficient. So it has to be skill-based, whether that's developing reading skills, comprehension skills, math skills, time management. Everything needs to be done intentionally so you can develop those skills. And then the last factor for ACT prep involves you being consistent. You have to be willing to commit a certain amount of time every day to develop those skills. See, once you have the structure in place, once you have the process that you're supposed to go through, all right, once you understand the intention behind the steps in the process, and you work on and you identify the skills that you're working on, the only way you can really develop those skills and become effective and efficient is by doing it consistently over and over and over again. So ACT prep has to have structure, it has to have processes, it has to have intention, it has to have skills, and it has to be consistent. Those 5 things are the guiding factors. And that's what we built the Pathway to 21 on as we developed this framework. So that's all we got for those factors. So let's really get into this ACT prep. And what I'm going to do now is share my screen, and I'm going to disappear for a while. All right, so let's get into this ACT prep Pathway to 21. So some of you have taken the test before, some of you have not taken the test. And if you have never taken the test, I always start out our sessions by providing an overview of what the test is like, how many questions you need, how many questions are provided for each section, how much time you have, and then what this section is actually testing you on. All right, so let's start by getting an overview. There are 4 components to the ACT. You got English, math, reading, and science. The English section has 75 questions that's delivered to you over 5 passages, and you got 45 minutes. The math section has 60 questions, and you're given 60 minutes to answer those 60 questions. Now you're given a 10 to 15 minute break so you can kind of regroup after you've done math, and then you move over to reading. And then once you get to reading, you got 40 questions that are delivered through 4 passages. You got 35 minutes. Then you have the science section. You have 40 questions. You usually get those 40 questions through 6 or 7 passages, and you got 35 minutes to answer those. And if you choose to do the writing is optional. There's 1 prompt, and you're given 40 minutes to answer that or to respond to that prompt. So you can see right now there are 4 content areas. There are a total of 215 questions. 215 questions. And you got 105 minutes for English and math, and then you got another 70 minutes for reading and science. So total you have 175 minutes 175 minutes to complete the ACT. So with that in mind, we've got to develop a plan on how do we attack the content in relation to the time that we're given. How do we attack the content in relation to the time that we're given? All right. So first thing is first, we got to know exactly what it is they're testing us on with the ACT. Now, the ACT is a 215 question reading test. It's not testing you on your ability to recall information. It's testing you on your ability to interact with information that is given to you and really trying to figure out, can you pull the answer? Can you derive the answer from the information that we give? All right. So let me see. It doesn't appear that my screen is moving. So hold 1 second. Let me stop. All right. So let me do this again. I apologize. Are you all able to see my slide now? Can you all see my slide? Okay. It appears that you all can you all see the slide that I'm sharing right now? Okay. I apologize for that. So real quick, I was really giving the information, the background about the test. You got 45 minutes to answer 75 English questions. You got 60 minutes to answer 60 math questions, 35 minutes to answer 40 reading questions, and 35 minutes to answer 40 science questions, and 40 minutes to respond to the writing prompt. So English is all about your ability to edit writing. Can you find mistakes in the writing that is presented to you? Can you identify where a comma should be, where a semicolon? Are the words in the appropriate place? Are they in the right form? So we want to be able to identify your ability to edit writing. The math section is all about your ability to solve word problems. All right. Your ability to solve those word problems. Now, some of the problems that you see on the math section are going to be straightforward, but the majority of them are in the fact that you need to be able to pull information from those problems. Reading is all about your ability to interpret and comprehend. So you're going to engage with those passages. It's 4 1,000 word passages. Can you pull the information from those passages and find the correct answer to the question? Science is all about your ability to read scientific information. Can you take a chart, a table, and a graph? And can you identify trends? Can you see what's going on? Can you identify the steps of the scientific method and come up with the correct answer? And then, of course, writing demonstrates your ability to write a sophisticated argument on the spot. So you're given a prompt, and can you develop that prompt? But for what we're doing, we're focusing on English, math, reading, and science. We're focusing on reading, math, English, math, reading, and science. So we're going to develop a plan on how to get to the 21. So I'm navigating to the next screen. And on this screen, it gives you a table of how many questions you need to get correct in order to get to a 21. And so what we want to focus on is looking at 75 questions on English and focusing on getting 49 to 51 questions right out of 75. For math, we want to focus on getting 31 to 32 questions right out of 60. For reading, we want to focus on getting 22 questions out of 40. And for science, we want to focus on the same thing, 21 to 22 questions. We want to get those correct out of 40. So what we're really doing is this. We're identifying our target number. So in school, if you get 49 to 50 questions out of 75, that's about 66%. That's a failing grade. Math, if you get 31 to 32 out of 60, that's a failing grade. Reading, if you get half of those questions, that's a failing grade. Science, the same thing. However, on the ACT, if we get 60% of English, 50% of math, 50% of reading, and 50% of the science questions, we actually get a 21 in each of those areas. And when we get a 21 in each of those areas, we average our average score comes out to a 21. So we know now as we go through our practice, we're charting our pathway and we're identifying exactly how many we need to get right along the way so we can ensure that we get that score. Now, the key is within those 75 English questions, there are definitely 49 to 51 questions that everyone should get correct. On the math section, within the 60 questions, there are definitely 31, maybe 40 questions, up to 40 questions that with your basic knowledge of math, you can get correct. Reading, there are 22 questions. There are 10 questions for each passage. There are enough questions that we could get to 22. And the same thing with science. So it's really all about zoning in on the content and familiarizing ourselves with how those questions are set up, how those answer choices are set up, and then doing enough practice so we can identify our strongest areas. And that way we know where to start when we get to those different components of the test. So what I need, if you all don't mind, because of how I'm presenting, would you all let me know if you're not able to see my screens? So now I'm on the screen where I'm sharing general ACT strategies that need to be applied to all sections. And so these strategies are ones that you will use regardless of the content area. So for science, English, math, and reading, the first thing you want to do is make sure you answer all questions. Answer all of the questions. The next thing you want to do is make sure you go through a process of elimination. All right. So hold 1 second because I'm having some issues with my sharing. All right. I apologize. Okay, so are we able to see my screen now? Let's see. All right, I do apologize for the technical difficulties. I'm trying to make sure. All right, so this is okay. Trying to make it bigger for everybody to see. All right. So apologize uh, for those delays. So now I'm giving you some general strategies to be applied to all sections. Number one, answer all questions. One of the biggest mistakes people make on their test is they leave questions unanswered. There are no penalties for guessing on the test. So make sure you answer all of the questions. Now, trying to answer all of the questions, it's important that you use certain strategies. So one of those strategies is to use the process of elimination. Look for the wrong answers first, especially as it relates to the science, the reading, and the English. Identify answers that you know don't work, don't fit, and that can help you eliminate those answers and narrow it down to maybe one or two choices. Number three, exchange for simplicity. If there's a word that you come across that you don't understand, as long as you understand the context of what is happening, you can switch that word out for anything. Number four, determine the order of difficulty. As you practice, if you go through those practice tests, as you do the reading, the English, the math, and science, you're going to be able to identify questions that are hard, questions that are medium, questions that are easy. We like to call them do now, do later, and do never. So once you identify the order of difficulty and what those questions look like, you can then start to navigate your way. You can develop a plan so when you get to the test, you'll know I answer these questions first, I answer these questions second, and I answer the third type of question last. Now, the English, science, and reading, they ask for the best answer. So Here's the thing. On the math section, only one answer can be correct. But English, science, and reading, there are a couple of those answer choices that could possibly be right. You have to be able to identify which is the best answer for what the question is asking you for. And then the final strategy that you apply to all sections, all questions, always guess. There are some questions that you're never going to be able to do, and that's fine. So what we want to do is employ a guessing strategy that I call mark and move. Now, some of you have heard this before. Choose one letter. Choose a favorite letter that can be A, B, C, or D. Choose that letter and use it for every question that you're going to guess on. So what you're really saying is, I may mark A, and beside that, I'm going to put a special symbol, because that special symbol is going to be useful for me later on when I get ready to review certain questions. So marking an answer choice and then making a special notation beside it, that's part of your game plan for what you're going to do with your questions that you guess on. So you have to be consistent. So as you go through your practice, you'll know if you're using the appropriate guessing strategy, because all of your guesses should have the same answer and they should all have this special mark beside it. If it doesn't, then you need to go back and make sure you're incorporating that strategy in your ACT prep. But these strategies are to be applied across all sections of the test. All right. So now, what are some common test taking errors that you should avoid? All right. There's some errors that you need to avoid when it comes down to taking this test. Number one, we already kind of talked about it. If you don't answer all of the questions, more than likely you spent too much time on something. All right. So you cannot navigate your way through this test and not answer all of the questions. So time is an element that you have to practice, and you have to practice pacing yourself with time. Now, the next error that you can make, though, is because we're so focused on the time, we may answer those questions too fast, and you end up having plenty of time left. So what you want to do is learn how to pace yourself so you can be comfortable and not nervous. So we got to answer all of the questions, but we don't want to do it too fast. Number three is you misread or you misinterpret the passages. So your reading and your comprehension skills are going to be very important, because if you're not reading those questions and those passages correctly, then it's going to lead you to error number 4, which is misreading the questions. So you misread the question, and that is going to kind of determine the type of answer that you're going to be trying to give. So we want to make sure we don't misread the question, but in order to not misread the question, we have to not misread or misinterpret the passage. And then the fifth and final error that you make is not considering all answer choices. So if you don't consider all of the answer choices, then the next thing for you to do is you're going to make that mistake. For some reason or another, my sharing isn't working, and I'm unable, you all are not able to see that screen. So let's pause for a few seconds. Give me a pause for a few seconds so I can correct this. All right, I think we are good to go now. Let me check with Ms. Cox to see. Are we good now, Ms. Cox? Okay, I'm waiting for a response. All right. So okay. So we're good. Again, I apologize. I apologize. So we are good to go now. And so again, common test taking errors to avoid. Number one, make sure you answer all of the questions. Number two, make sure in answering all of the questions, you don't do it too fast. So we got to develop a plan for the time. All right. Number three, we make sure we read the passages for comprehension, because that's going to allow us to read the questions correctly. And when we read the questions correctly, it gives us the opportunity to consider all of the answer choices. So these are some things that as you do your ACT prep, as you're doing practice questions, as you're doing passages and things of that nature, you want to make sure that you avoid these errors. All right, so if you miss a question, you're going to always be able to go back and figure out, did you misread the passage or did you misread the question? Or did you not consider all the answer choices? So every time you do something, when you don't get it correct, you want to be able to come back and find out which one of these mistakes that you possibly made. All right. And so as you go through practice, it's important that you identify do now questions. It's important that you identify do later questions. And it is important that you identify do never questions. Why do we want to do this? Because on the test, when you get to those questions in a reading passage, even though there are 10 questions for each passage, you don't have to go right in order. Go and find those questions that may tell you exactly where to go to find the answer. So you want to do those first because those are the ones that you're most likely to get correct. Then you want to move on to those that you can do a little bit later. And those are maybe some that require a little bit more thought process, require you to go into the passage or to the chart and graph a little bit more. And then there are some that are do never. They may ask you about the passage or the experiment as a whole, and you really just can't understand what it is they're wanting you to do. So you do those questions never. As a matter of fact, you do those last, and those are the questions that you're really going to guess on. So do now, do later, do never. Do now, do later, do never. Get in the habit of putting those questions in those categories, and that's going to help you with your plan overall as you get ready to take the test. So those are general basic strategies. All right. And I know the first part of this was a little chopped up with the sharing and everything. And I promise I'll come back and close it and wrap it all up nice and neatly. But you know what's on the test now. You know exactly how many questions we need to get right in each area. You know some basic general strategies to apply to all components of the test. You've identified common mistakes and errors that people make on the test. So now the object for the next hour and a half is how do you navigate through each section individually so you can arrive at that 21. So we're going to go in the order in which the test is presented. Now, what you'll find is this. The strategies and the tips that I share for English, science, and reading are not as extensive as the ones that we're going to do for math. English, reading, and science pretty much move the same way. So there are not a lot of things that you have to do to get prepared for the English, reading, and the science compared to the math. So don't be alarmed at the conciseness of the tips and strategies that you're going to receive for those 3 sections compared to the math. It's simply because the math requires a little bit more. So what do you need to do for English? Well, the first thing is we know that the English section is going to be testing us on our ability to edit writing. So if it's testing us on our ability to edit writing, then we've got to understand exactly what it is that they're looking for. We got to have a breakdown. All right. So a breakdown of that test. Excuse me, 1 second. All right. To make sure we were charged up all the way. A breakdown of that test finds us with 75 questions. Now, 40 of these questions focus on mechanics and usage. So it's all about grammar. The other 35 questions are about effective writing. So when we break it down into 40 for grammar and 35 about effective writing, what does that look like? Well, 10 to 15% of those questions is all about punctuation. And that punctuation is really geared towards comma usage. Can you identify when commas are supposed to be used and when they're not supposed to be used? 15 to 20% of those questions is all about grammar usage. It's the appropriate word being used in the appropriate form. And the other 20 to 25% of those mechanics questions, sentence structure. Does it flow? Subject and verb agreement, noun and pronoun agreement. So you're looking at 40 questions that's really focusing on your ability to identify are the appropriate grammar rules being followed. Now, here's the thing that gets us today, because when we communicate with our friends and our family members, we don't always use the appropriate grammar. We don't follow those rules. And so when we see it in written form, it's hard to identify. But you don't have to be able to define what a comma is. You don't have to be able to define what a noun or a pronoun. You just need to be able to identify if it's being used according to the grammar rules. So those are some of the things that we want to look at during prep. We want to go and look for some background information about commas, when to use them. We want to look for some background information about subject verb agreement. And that's the extent of what you want to do as it relates to getting prepared for those grammar questions. And then we just really want to go through and make sure we're answering those questions, finding the one that best fits what the question is asking for. But now the other 35 is all about effective writing. So 10 to 15% of those questions is about strategy. Is it laid out right? Does it flow in the appropriate manner? 10 to 15% is all about organization. So sometimes when those subject and verbs, when we're looking at subject and verb agreement, we're looking at sometimes, do they connect? So you may have a subject in one place and you may have 4 or 5 words in between that verb. Are those things situated appropriately? Is the phrasing right? And then the style of writing. So you got 15 to 20% of those questions. Now, the great thing about the English is this. Is set up in a manner where you're not really supposed to try and read an entire passage and then go back and answer. You're supposed to answer these questions as you go along. So you're going to be reading, and you're going to be reading for comprehension and flow. And so you're going to be able to navigate your way through these passages without any problem. But you got to know the rules. You got to know the rules. So the first part of getting ready for the English test is to be familiar with the breakdown of the questions and how they're going to be presented to you. So we got 40 for mechanics, 35 for rhetorical skills. So now, knowing the breakdown of the questions, you can now zone in on how will those questions be presented to you. So there are pretty much 4 main types of English questions that you can really guarantee that you're going to see. Number 1, using correct punctuation. We've already talked about that a little bit. So you're going to have questions, and they're going to have parts that are underlined, and it's going to be looking to see, is that supposed to be a comma? Is it supposed to be a colon? Is it supposed to be a semicolon? Is the correct punctuation being used? The second type is the correct form of the word. The third, logic questions. Correct relationship between 2 parts of a sentence or a paragraph. Is the relationship contrasting or not contrasting? And we're talking about transition words, transitional phrases, things like that as you move between paragraphs. Does the word that's underlined, does it make or cause for the appropriate transition? So you're looking for those relationship and logic questions. And then number 4, the main idea or interpretation questions. Those are usually the last 1 or 2 questions related to that passage. So 4 types of questions. You're going to be able to figure out what types of questions you're most successful with during your practice. And when you do that, you want to make sure you are focused enough so you can get those questions correct. So, the breakdown of the English section, 40 for mechanics, 40 for grammar, 35 for effective writing. You now know the 4 types of English questions that's going to be presented to you. So what are the rules that you need to really zone in on as it relates to getting prepared for the English test? Well, here are 4 top grammar rules that you can focus on. 4 top. Number 1, subject-verb agreement rule. Number 1, anytime you see a verb underlined, all you have to do is match it to its subject. Anytime you see a verb underlined, match it to its subject. The subject-verb agreement rule number 2, ACT is not going to make it easy for you to be able to identify what subject and verb are supposed to agree. So they're going to put some words in between, or maybe it's some phrases. So you need to be familiar with and understand the fact that in most cases, the subject and verb are going to be separated from each other. So you still got to be able to match those 2 together. Something else you're going to see when you get with the ACT about pronoun and noun agreement. When you see a pronoun, make sure it agrees with the noun it refers to. I always give an example that says the class is getting prepared for their trip. And so when I read that and when people see it, I ask them, is that sentence correct? And most people say yes. And then when we break down the pronoun and the noun, the class is getting prepared for their trip. The noun is class. So, and since class is singular, we can't use the word there. So it must be the class is preparing for its trip. So something as simple as that, ACT will test you on your ability to recognize it and then give the appropriate answer. And then the final rule for pronoun noun agreement is to remember that someone, everyone, or everybody need a singular pronoun. Those words, even though it sounds like it's talking about a whole lot of people, it's really referring to one individual. And so it needs a pronoun. Now, there's nothing magical about this, but these are top 4 rules that if you commit these to your mind and think about this as you're navigating through those English passages, then these are going to help you solve and answer some of those questions that are presented to you. Now, in addition to those grammar rules, you're going to need to understand some structure rules, some sentence structure rules. So misplaced modifiers. So if there's a word or a phrase describing something, make sure it is close enough to that word it is supposed to modify. Make sure it is close enough. So here's a key word that I'm giving you today. And what you should do is take this misplaced modifiers, go to YouTube, go to Google, put it in the search engine, and find you a couple of videos that's going to give you some explanation about modifiers. And then get familiar with just the basic rules behind it. And then you'll be able to understand how it's supposed to be used. And the same thing with parallelism. All right. You want to make sure you go and look at this word, research it a little bit, get a couple of videos, and find out exactly what parallelism is, so you'll know what it looks like when it's presented on the test. Now, that's pretty much all you need as relates to getting ready for the English section of the ACT. Understanding what the breakdown is, understanding the types of questions you're going to be presented with, and then knowing those few basic grammar and structure rules. Those things combined give you the content knowledge that you need for the English section. Now, knowing all of that stuff is going to help you when it comes down to answering the questions. So you got to ask yourself three things. When you see something underlined, ask yourself three questions. Number one, does it belong? Number two, does it sound like proper English? And number three, does it make sense? Does it belong? And does it make sense? Those things right there are rooted in understanding those rules. But the second one, does it sound like proper English? Again, remember, because we're so used to not communicating according to the rules. What may sound appropriate isn't necessarily correct. So you got to be willing to, this is why you got to go back and familiarize yourself with some of those basic things that I just shared with you a few minutes ago. But ask yourself, does it belong? Does it sound like proper English? And does it make sense? And so as you go through that, now you got to ask yourself, if you're having any doubt about it, take it out. And what does that mean? ACT is going to give you questions related to sections that are underlined. If you have doubts about it, take it out. Because more than likely you're having questions or second thoughts about whether it belongs, whether it makes sense, or whether it sounds like proper English. So when in doubt, take it out. This third component for process of elimination, ACT likes the shortest answer possible. So if you get to the answer choices and those answer choices are longer than what's in the original passage, then you're more than likely going to choose no change, because ACT never goes with the longest answer. Don't be too influenced by the answer just because something is there. Just because something may look like it's correct, it doesn't mean that it is correct, because you have to be comfortable with no change. Several of the questions that you come across will require you to not have to change anything, and you have to be comfortable with that. So the trick is to know that sometimes I need to make an answer, I need to make an adjustment, and other times I don't. But if you go through these 5 steps right here as it relates to process of elimination, you'll be able to get to the correct answer choice with the English section. So how do you do this? Well, remember, one of those mistakes that we have is we got 2 mistakes that we can have. Number one, we can not answer all the questions. Number 2, we can answer the questions too fast. So you got to have a plan for time. Your plan for time goes like this. There are 5 passages for a total of 75 questions, and you got 45 minutes. Now that would give you 9 minutes per passage. But with the pathway to 21, what we want you to do is this. Use 8 minutes for each passage. So 8 minutes to answer 15 questions. If you use 8 minutes to answer 15 questions, you essentially shift 1 minute to the end for review. Now, full implementation of this strategy means that you're going to spend 40 minutes reading and answering 15 questions. 75 questions. You're going to shift 5 minutes to the end for review. Now, as you're answering your questions in those 8 minutes, remember, if there's a question that you aren't comfortable with, you're going to guess, choosing your letter of the day and putting that special mark beside it. Because during the test, they're going to say you got 5 minutes remaining. And when you get to 5 minutes remaining for the English section, you know it's time for you to start reviewing only the guesses. Review only the guesses. And so what is happening is this. You're going to be answering questions along the way. We're going to be committed. We're going to be committed to only spending 8 minutes for 15 questions. So as you're doing your practice, you're going to set your watch or your timer to 8 minutes, and you're going to do a passage for English. And your goal is to answer 15 questions. You're going to do it again, and you're going to do it again, and you're going to do it again, and then you're going to take a full English test. And your goal is going to be to get through all 75 questions in 40 minutes. And your goal is also going to be to use those 5 minutes remaining to review only your guesses. If you do this over and over and over again, the goal is to try and attempt to get at least 10 to 11 questions right for every 15. If you get 10 questions right for every 15, you essentially answer 50 out of 75. If you get 11 questions right out of every 15, you answer 55 questions, and that puts you on your path to a 21. So this is your daily plan. So remember, we talked about structure, process-oriented. We talked about it being intentional. We talked about skill-based, and we talked about being consistent. Here's how you do it with the English. Always simulate the testing environment. Always set your timer for 8 minutes. Always complete a passage of 15 questions. Make sure you identify the type of English question that's being asked, whether it's about punctuation, the form of the word, whether it's about the structure of the sentence, whether it's about the main idea, whether it's a logic question. Make sure you apply the grammar or the sentence structure rules. Make sure you apply the process of elimination. Once you finish answering those questions, make sure you go and score it, evaluate it for correctness. And after you evaluate for correctness, you're going to be able to identify your strengths. And then you're also going to be able to identify areas for improvement. Go back, familiarize yourself with that concept a little bit more, and then come back and practice again. By doing this over and over and over, you're going to build your capacity to be able to navigate your way successfully through the English test and get a 21 on that section. All right. So that's English. And now we got to move on to math. Are there any questions so far? Are there any questions so far? And I can't really see the comments right now. Are there any questions so far? All right. If there are no questions, I think Miss Cox, if you wouldn't mind, if there are questions in the chat, just put those down if you can, and then we'll come back and answer those at the end. All right, so now we're going to move on to math. And this is the section that gives people the most trouble. So this math section, again, there are 60 questions. You got 60 minutes. So what is it that they're going to test you on as it relates to math? Here you go. 6 types of ACT math questions: pre-algebra, elementary algebra, intermediate algebra, coordinate geometry, plane geometry, and trigonometry. Those questions combine to give you 60 problems. Now, I know a lot of people don't like math, So the goal is to figure out how to do the least amount of math as possible. The first thing you got to be familiar with is what is it that they're going to be testing you on this test. So we got 6 types of questions. Now, here's what we know. Everybody has done pre-algebra. Everybody has done elementary algebra. Everybody has done intermediate algebra. Most people have done some type of coordinate geometry. Most people have had exposure to some plane geometry. A few people have had access to trigonometry. So what I'm saying is everything that you're going to be tested on, you've already been exposed to in some way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, the majority of the skills you need for the math section, you have developed those skills by 8th grade. The problem is some of you haven't taken math in 2 to 3 years. We don't use it every day, or we don't think we use it every day. And so we lose those concepts. So what I want you to do is this. Don't become overwhelmed because there are 6 types of math questions, because you're not going to be able to learn all this math in a couple of weeks. But which area are you strongest in? Are you strongest in the algebras? And if you are, then if we look, we estimating about 34 questions are algebra based. If it's geometry, then we're estimating about 24 questions are geometry based. If you know trig, about 4 of those questions. Here's the thing, we got to get 31 to 32. So for the most of us, this algebra area is where we're going to find success. The algebra area is where we're going to find success. Because it doesn't matter which 31 to 32 questions we get. It only matters that we get 31 to 32 questions. All right? So we can focus on those types of math questions. But the real thing we need to do is identify a step-by-step process that's going to allow us to attack any one of those types of math questions, regardless of what it is. And these 5 steps help you build your way to the answer. So I know it may seem simple, but if you practice doing this over and over and over, you give yourself a game plan for math. And you don't feel overwhelmed. You don't feel stressed. So number 1, you got to read the problem. Number 2, you got to ask yourself 3 important questions. Number 3, you got to set up your equation. Number 4, you got to use a process of elimination strategy. And number 5, you can finally answer the question. Step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some people get to the math section and go straight to the question. To the answer choices. Well, you got to know what the question is asking you first. But sometimes people don't know what the problem is asking them because they haven't asked themselves 3 questions. They don't know how to read the problem. Sometimes the answer choices aren't presented to the test taker because they haven't set up the equation. Or they scrap all of this and go straight to the calculator. The calculator has a purpose. And the calculator should only be used after you've gone through some of these steps. All right. So let's talk about these steps individually. Step number 1, it's all about reading the problem. Now, I like to break this down. There are 3 types of problems on the math ACT. Number 1, math for everybody. Let's count those algebra questions and things like that. Straightforward and can be answered quickly. It's going to be a problem that's set up, and you should get those correct. So again, math for everybody. These questions are easy and should be answered correctly. So within the first 30 to 40 questions, there are several opportunities for you to get to that 31 to 32 number. Now, in addition to math for everybody, you have those questions or those problems that's math for some. Those are the word problems. And when you see word problems, you have to be able to read and comprehend what the problem is asking you for, because you've got to be able to identify key variables and set up your equations. If you don't set up your equations, then more than likely you're going to arrive at an answer that may not even be one of the choices that ACT provides for you. And just a quick thing, if the answer that you arrive at is not one of the 5 answer choices that ACT gives you, then the math that you are doing is incorrect, because the answer can only be one of those 5. All right, so you got math for everybody. Those are easy questions, due now. You got math for some. Those are a little bit more difficult. Those are some due later. But then you have math for a few, like trigonometry. And that requires a higher level of mathematical reasoning that is considered hard. We have a very simple strategy for math for few. Guess. Choose your letter, whether that's A or B, make your special mark, and move on. Don't get stuck on these problems. These are the problems that cause you to spend 5 to 6 minutes, and you end up not answering every question, or you end up rushing to answer questions at the end that you should get correct. So math for few, don't do them at all. Guess, mark it, and move on. But the only way you can really identify if the problem is for you or not for you at all is you've got to be doing practice ACT problems every day. You got to get comfortable identifying those algebra questions that you know you can do, the geometry questions that you know you can do. And if you can do trig, get familiar with the trigonometry concepts so you can do those as well. But this comes from you doing practice over and over and over again. So that's step 1. Read your problem. So after you read your problem, you got to do step 2. And step 2 is you have to ask yourself 3 questions in your mind after you complete reading that problem. The first question you're going to ask is, what is the problem looking for? What is it that they want me to do? What am I trying to solve? The second question you ask yourself is, what prevents me from giving them that solution? Something is missing. What is that missing element? What is that missing variable that prevents me from giving them what they're looking for? And then number 3, what do I already know that can help solve the problem? Most people know how to add, multiply, subtract, and divide. If you know how to add, multiply, subtract, and divide, guess what? That's something you already know. If you already know the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, that's something that you know that can help you solve the problem. If you know the area of a triangle, if you know the area of a square, if you know the slope formula, things you already know, you can use them to help solve problems. Now, here's the thing. You have to ask those questions within the first 10 seconds. The first 10 to 15 seconds, you got to ask those questions. Because remember, we only have a certain amount of time. So once you've read the problem, remember, you got to read the problem correctly. Ask yourself 3 questions. What is the problem looking for? what is missing from the problem, and what do I already know that can help solve it. Do that within the first 10 to 15 seconds. All right? Because once you've done step 2, then we get to step 3. And step 3 is all about setting up the equation. So step 3 puts you in a position to be able to use process of elimination to get to the right answer on the math section. So you got to read your problem. You got to identify what's missing so you can set up the equation. So on the screen, I got 2 examples here. 200 technicians went to a conference in August. If there were 30 more men than women at the conference, how many women attended that conference? All right, so we're reading this problem. And so the first question is, what is the problem looking for? Problem wants to know how many women attended the conference. So we let W stand for women. What's missing? We do not know how many men were at that conference. We don't know how many men were at the conference. But what do we know? We know there was a total of 200 people, and we know that there are 30 more men than women. So we let W plus 30 equal men. And now we have an equation. W, women plus men equal 200. So we are now set up an equation where we can give them what they're looking for. But we had to be able to rely on what we knew. We had to be able to rely on our reading skills to set this equation up appropriately. In the second example we have, if the sum of 3 consecutive even integers is P, then in terms of P, what is the least of the 3 integers? All right. So this question is talking about the sum of 3 consecutive even integers is P. So the sum of 3 consecutive, N1 plus N2 plus N3 is P. Then in terms of P, what is the least of the 3 integers? So the 3 numbers that we add up to P. We got to be able to figure out which of those 3 is the least. But in order to do that, we got to set up this equation first to find out what P is. So steps 1, 2, and 3 are very critical to your success on the math section. So as you're doing prep for math, you should first focus on making sure you are able to read that problem and identify if it's a problem that you should even be attempting to do, or if it's one you should do a little bit later, or if it's one you should do never. You've got to do that. And as you read those problems, you get comfortable asking yourself 3 questions. What is the problem looking for? What am I missing? And what do I already know? And those 2 steps are the foundation for you being able to set up your equation appropriately. If you have a misstep in steps 1, 2, or 3, you will not get the answer correct. So you have to practice step 1, step 2, step 3. That's the process. 1, 2, 3. And once you get comfortable doing steps 1, 2, and 3, you're ready to move on to step 4. And step 4 is all about using a process of elimination. All right. So again, if you don't like math, then we shouldn't try to do a lot of math on the front end. We got to use strategies that put us in a position to get to the correct answer. ACT doesn't care how you get to the answer. They just want you to get to the correct answer. Now, it's important to note that unlike the English, reading, and science that ask you for the best answer, the math section is the only one that has the correct answer, where there's only one answer that can be correct. And so they give us a head start by giving us 5 possible answers. So giving us 5 possible answer choices lets us know, number 1, that the only answer that we can get that can be correct is one of the 5 that's given. But number 2, it allows us to use some strategy to be able to eliminate the answers that are incorrect. So what does that look like? We got 2 strategies. Number 1 is back solving. Number 2 is plugging your own numbers. So process of elimination strategy number 1, back solving. All right. Basically what we want to do is this. We want to take one of those 5 answer choices that ACT gives to us, and we want to take that answer choice and we want to insert it into the equation or into the problem that we got set up. Now, the key is to not just start with answer choice A, then B, then C, then D, then E. We want to be very intentional. So where we start is in the middle. We start with the 3rd answer choice because the answers are usually listed in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. All right, so by starting in the center, we're starting with the middle. So we plug that middle answer choice in, and it is going to either be correct or incorrect. Of course, if it's correct, we mark that answer choice, but if it's incorrect, it's going to tell us something. That middle answer may be too big, or if it's too small. And if it's too big, 2 of the other answers are going to be too big. If it's too small, 2 of the other answers are going to be too small. So we can essentially eliminate 3 wrong answers by starting in the middle. I want you to understand that starting in the middle is either going to give you the right answer the first time, or it's going to give you access to 3 incorrect answers. It's a lot easier to choose between 2 than it is to choose between 5. So we want to get real comfortable starting with in the middle and then plugging it in and solving to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, we get rid of 3 answers. And then all we have to do is pick any one of the 2 remaining answer choices and plug it in. And we'll be able to get to the correct answer. So this is back solving. This is you literally taking what they give you and using it to your advantage. Using it to your advantage so you don't have to go through and test out every answer choice. Because testing out every answer choice really takes up a lot of your time. So we want to use back solving. All right. So what does that look like? Remember in the example that we had earlier, we were talking about the 200 technicians and they went to the conference. We got our equation. Women plus men equal 200. So back solving strategy tells us to start in the middle. And if we start in the middle, we take 100 and we add it. We insert the 100 everywhere we have W to see if it's going to satisfy and give us 200. Well, we can see 100 plus 130 gives us 230. And that doesn't equal to 200. So if we look at it and we apply the strategy, if 100 is too big, then surely 115 and 170 are too big. And so at that point, we're now left to choose between A and B. And if we choose we choose B, we end up with 85 plus 85 plus 30. Well, that's 85 plus 115, and that is equal to 200. So we find out that the correct answer choice is B. But we went through these 5 steps. All right. We went through these 5 steps. I think it stops. And then going through those 5 steps, we're able to see, we read the problem, we ask 3 questions, and then we set up an equation. And once we set up the equation, we went through the process of elimination. And the process of elimination said we start with C, we plug it in, we find out that C is too big, we get rid of 2 other answer choices, and then we choose between A and B. We chose B, and we plugged it in for W, and we got to the correct answer. So steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they work. when we do it the appropriate way. All right, so that's back solving. The second process of elimination strategy is all about plugging in your own numbers. All right, but you got to know when to plug in your own numbers. So there are a couple of things that you need to look for as you do ACT prep for math, and you're looking for these things. Number one, if you see a variable in the problem, more than likely you're going to be able to use your own number. If you see variables in the answer choices, you want to use your own numbers. And if you see phrases like in terms of, you want to use your own numbers. All right. So what they're essentially saying is this: we're going to give you the equation, or we're going to give you the variables. And when you have the variables, the only thing you need to do is think of a number. It's like that game. Think of a number 1 through 5. And then you plug in your own numbers. Now, here's the key. Don't use big numbers and avoid using 0 or 1. Avoid using 0 or 1. And the reason you want to avoid using 0 or 1 because they can be misleading. The reason you want to avoid using big numbers is because they're going to require you to use your calculator. That's going to take up time. Now, here's the other thing. As you're going through, when you use your own numbers, you may have to test it in multiple answer choices because the number that you choose at first, like maybe 2 could actually work for multiple answers. So then you want to move on and test another number, maybe 3, and see if that works in all of the answer choices as well. So by using your own numbers, you can control how much time you have to dedicate to answering that problem. So what does that look like? Let's go back to the example where we were talking about the sum of 3 consecutive even integers is p. Then in terms of p, what is the least of the 3 integers? All right. So we looked and saw that they're talking about the sum of 3 consecutive integers is equal to p. So we've set up that equation. All right. So then it says in terms of p, the problem wants to know what is the least of the 3 integers. So for this particular example, I use 4, 6, and 8 for N1, N2, and N3. So we plug those in and we get 18. So now we're saying P is equal to 18. All right. So the thing is, it says now we got to go over here to the answer choices and find which of these answer choices is going to give us the least. And the least of them is 4. So we got to find out which one of these answer choices is going to give us 4. Now that we know what P is. So we go down and we start with C. And when we plug C in, all right, we say 18 divided by 3. Well, 18 divided by 3 is 6. Is 6 the least out of 4, 6, and 8? We say no. So we can go and get rid of 2 additional answer choices. Why? Because down here, P is adding 3, P is adding 6. So it's really going to make those numbers bigger. So then we choose between A and B. If we choose B, we end up with 18 minus 3 divided by 3. Well, that's 15 divided by 3. That's 5. 5 is not an even number. So B is incorrect, and the correct answer is A. All right. So, but the process says we read the problem first. We asked ourselves 3 questions. We did not know what those even numbers were. We did not know what P was, but we knew we were adding 3 consecutive even integers. And so by doing that, we were able to set up an equation to find out what P, to identify P. And once we identified P, we were able to go through the process of elimination by using our own numbers. And we arrived at the correct answer choice. So those 5 steps work, whether you're having to do back solving or whether you're having to do plug in and use your own numbers. Regardless if it's an algebra question or if it's something else, you're able to really use those 5 steps, and then use those process of elimination strategies to arrive at the correct answer. All right. And so for math, remember we talked about one of the questions you're going to ask yourself is, what do I already know? Now, you don't have to know all of these formulas, but you want to get familiar. There are a couple of these formulas that you're definitely going to be tested on when it comes to the ACT. Number one, the area of a triangle. 1/2 base time height. 1/2 base time height, that doesn't change. Regardless of the triangle, the area is always going to be 1/2 base time height. The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. That doesn't change. So it's always going to be a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. The area of a square or rectangle is always going to be the same. Base time height. Base time height it does not change. So you need to get familiar with those 3 formulas. And then the other formulas that are on this page, yes, you can get familiar with them too, because there may be 1 or 2 problems. But we know that you're going to have to know the area of a triangle, the Pythagorean theorem, and the area of a square or rectangle. All right. So those are the formulas that you need to know for math. Get familiar with those things. View some YouTube videos, do some practice, and then do you some practice ACT questions. All right. So I have an example here of what that looks like. So in the picture below, ABCD is a rectangle. If the area of triangle ABE is 40, what is the area of the rectangle? So now, this problem is asking us for the area of the entire rectangle ABCD. But we don't know what the base is for AD. We know part of the base is 4. We know part of the base is 4. All right. But we don't know what this full base is. But what do we know? We know the area of this triangle is 40. So we know that area is equal to 1/2 base time height. So that's saying that 40 is equal to 1/2. But we don't know the base. But what else do we know? We know that the height of this triangle. So this is 8. So when we go through and solve it to find out what this base is of this triangle, we're going to just simply do the math here at this point, and we end up with 40 is equal to 4b, and we divide both sides by 4. And so the base of the triangle is 10. Now we have our base for the rectangle, which is 10 plus 4, which is 14. So now what is the area of the rectangle? We know the area of the rectangle is equal to base time height. Well, what is the base? The base is 14. What is the height? The height is 8. And when we multiply 8 times 14, we end up with 112. So the answer is E. So in this particular problem, we had to know a couple of things. We had to know the area of the triangle so we could find the base. And once we found the base of the triangle, we were able to find the base of the rectangle. And then we needed to know the area of the rectangle, which is base time height. So this is what happens with the ACT. You will sometimes have to combine concepts to solve the problem, but the 5 steps still work. Read the problem, ask 3 questions, set up your equations, use the process of elimination when appropriate, and then get to the correct answer. So how do you do this for math with 60 minutes? Well, for 60 minutes, you got 60 questions. That means you got 1 minute per question. If you do that, you don't have any time for review. And one thing that people need for math is the opportunity to review. So what does that look like? So instead of using the entire 1 minute to answer the problem, we want to use 50 seconds. 50 seconds to answer that question. What you're essentially doing is shifting 10 seconds to the end for review. So full implementation of this time strategy will have you answering 12 questions every 10 minutes. All right. So that gives you 5 sets of 12. 5 times 12 is 60. 5 times 10 is 50. So you end up answering all 60 questions in 50 minutes. What you essentially done is shifted 10 minutes to the end of the test for review. And remember, the only questions you're going to be reviewing are those that you are guessing on. Now, here's my rule for math when it comes down to guessing. You know within the first 10 to 20 seconds whether or not you're going to be able to answer a question or not. If in 10 to 20 seconds you say that you can't answer, go ahead, use the guessing strategy, mark your answer, and make that little special mark beside it and come back to it for review. So they're not going to give you any extra time, but we can certainly shift that 10 minutes. So by the time they say you got 5 minutes remaining, you should already be 5 minutes into your math review. Don't spend the time on that particular question. Don't waste time on that question. If it's a hard question and you don't know, go ahead and guess and move on. You can come back and review. But this is going to take practice. So every time you do a math problem, whether you're doing one, set your timer for 50 seconds and attempt to answer that question in 50 seconds. Then do it again and again and again, and you will be comfortable. You won't have any problem answering 60 math questions in 50 minutes and then using the other 10 minutes for review. So how do you do this for math? Every day. Every day. If you're doing one math problem, set it for 50 seconds. If you're doing 12 math problems, set it for 10 minutes. Use the 5 steps to answering the math. Make sure you employ that mark and move strategy for your guesses. Make sure you answer all questions. That is a real key component. Every time you are doing strategy sessions, your goal is to always answer all questions. Then what you want to do is come back, identify those you got correct, identify those you got incorrect, and see what type of math problem is it. Is it an algebra? Is it geometry? Is it trigonometry? And then you go back, review that concept, and come back and practice again. All right? Come back and practice again. So we've covered English and we've covered math. We've covered English and we covered math. All right. So right here, I want to take a minute to pause for 30 seconds, and then I will be right back and we're going to finish out with the reading and the science. All right. Thank you all. We are back and we're going to go ahead and close this out. We have 2 more sections. And so we've done English, we've done math. Now let's do reading and science. All right. So as I indicated earlier, the strategies and the tips you need for the English reading and science, they're not as extensive as the math. So this is really about what you're going to be doing during your prep sessions. And that helps you get prepared to be able to do what you need to do on the actual test. So for the reading, you got 4 1,000 word passages that you're going to have to read. Now, reading in school, reading for a test in school and reading for the ACT are two totally different things. Because when you're reading for a test at school, you're reading to commit stuff to your memory. So when you see it on a test, you can identify it very quickly. You can recall. That's passive reading. On the ACT, you have to do active reading. That means you have to be able to engage with what you are reading at that present moment, and then be able to quickly navigate your way to whatever is in that passage to support the answer choice that you're going to choose. So you got to do active reading. So this is not about memorizing. This is about being able to interact with what you have in front of you, identifying key details, writing in your book, creating a ledger so when you go to your questions, you have a way to navigate primarily back to the answer choice, because everything that you're going to be tested on in the reading section is included within those passages. All right, so there are 4 steps to answering any reading question on the ACT. So first thing you got to do is, as you get ready to navigate, I want you to understand that you're going to have passage 1, 2, 3, and 4. But it doesn't mean you have to go in that order, passage 1, 2, 3, and 4. What am I saying? The very first step to being able to successfully answer or get the correct number of questions right on the ACT reading is always begin with your strongest passage type. In a few minutes, I'm going to identify those 4 types of passages. But as you are practicing, you're going to find that there's a certain passage type that you do all the time where you're getting the majority of your questions correct. Remember, we got to get to 20, 21, 22 questions. We may even go to 24. In order to do that, if there's a passage where you're consistently getting 6 to 7 questions right during practice, it makes sense for you to start with that, because we're just trying to get to the number of correct questions. It doesn't matter which one. So step 1 is to always begin with your strongest passage type. Step 2 is when you start to answer those questions for that passage type, you need to identify which type of question and the difficulty of it. So just because it's question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for that passage, you don't have to answer them in that order. Now, you're going to answer all 10 questions for the passage when you're doing it, but you can start with question 5. You can start with question 7, especially if those are the types of questions that you are consistently getting correct during your practice sessions. So you always want to start with your strongest, because those are the ones that's most likely to give you the points that you need. Step 3, once you have identified your question type and the order of difficulty, remember, use that process of elimination. This is where engaging with your passage is going to help you out, because you're going to be able to refer back to the passage, and it's going to help you to eliminate the answer choices that aren't supported in the passage. So the passages is always going to support those answer choices that are correct or the best one. Then step 4, once you have eliminated the wrong answers, choose the best answer that's available. Now, again, if it's something you just don't understand and you just really can't comprehend, employ that guessing strategy. Choose your letter and make that special mark so you can come back during review. But this is the process you should go through to master and navigate through the reading test. Begin with your strongest passage, identify question type and difficulty, employ that process of elimination, and then choose the best answer, guessing if necessary. Now, after you do your strongest passage type, go to the second, and then the third, and then of course you end with the one that you're least successful with doing practice. All right, so those are 4 steps to answering reading. So what are those types of passages? Well, you got 4 types: prose fiction, social sciences, humanities, and natural science. Now, social sciences, humanities, and natural sciences, those are pretty much rooted in fact. So those are a little bit, or should be a little bit more, should be a little easier to navigate. Prose fiction is fiction, so you got to do a little bit more interpretation. But regardless of that, by taking several practice tests, you're going to be able to find out which one you're the strongest in. So if humanities is your strongest passage type, but it happens to be the fourth passage on the reading section, guess what you do? You go and start with the fourth passage. And then you work your way back to the one that you're second most successful with, and third most successful, and then the least. So just because it's presented as passage 1, 2, 3, and 4, you may not necessarily go in that order. Start with the one that you are getting the most questions right during practice, because that's the one that's going to put you closer to the 21 to 22 correct answers. So imagine starting out with your first passage and you get 8 out of 10. Well, that means between the remaining 3, you only need to get 14 questions right. So that means you only need to get about 4 to 5 questions right per passage. So we setting ourselves up to accumulate as many correct answers as we can early on in the test. So practice tests are required so you can identify your strongest passage type. Now, when you're practicing and you're going through these passages, you got to engage in active reading. Active reading requires you to write in the book. It requires you to make notes. It requires you to really engage with what you're doing. All right. And so there are 2 steps to active reading. Number 1, read the blurb. All right. Read that blurb, and it's located at the top of the passage. It's going to be located in the same spot for every passage type. All right. And then the second thing you want to do is read the entire passage, and you got to read it in 3 minutes. So this is where you're not really reading to comprehend everything, but you're reading to get an overview. So how do you read that passage in 3 minutes? Number 1, you're going to read the first line of every paragraph because that's the main idea. All right. So you read that first paragraph in its entirety, read the first sentence of each paragraph in between, and you can skim the other sentences, making sure you can underline and circle keywords and things of that nature. All right. And then make sure you read the final paragraph as a whole because it sums up the entire passage. All right. Also, make sure you write notes in the book so you can create identifiers. Now, why are you doing this in 3 minutes? Simply because when you get to the questions, you're going to be forced to go back and read again anyway. So by the time you have actually gone through all questions, you would have read the passage maybe 2 or 3 times in its entirety. So it's not about reading it to commit to memory on the front end. It's about reading so you can get familiar with what the content is, and then creating a way for you to navigate yourself back to it when it's time to answer those questions. Now, I want you to focus on what's in the red here. If you focus what's on the red, all correct answers are directly supported by the passage. So you don't have to remember what you have read. Don't try to commit to memory. All right. Don't try to commit to memory and then get to your questions and just solely try to answer it based on what you remember. So this is why it's important to underline that first sentence in each paragraph. Make you some notes beside the paragraphs to kind of give you an overview, a synopsis of what that paragraph is talking about, because you're going to need those things to go when it's time to answer the questions. It's going to help support the answer you're thinking about choosing. So identifying your passage type that you're strongest in is directly related to you engaging in active reading so you can really navigate your way through that test. All right. And so, as with the math, the English, you still got to know that there are 3 types of questions. So the reading questions are designed to do a couple of things. Number one, the first type of question is one that says, get the answer. This is a do first question, do now type question. It is going to really tell you lines 1 through 5. It's going to tell you exactly which paragraph, the phrase, or the specific line numbers to go to find the answer. Guess what? Do those first. You really should get those questions correct because they're telling you where to go find the answer. The second type of question is your ability to analyze based on the given information. So you should do those later. You should do those second. All right. So it's going to give you something, and then you got to derive your answer from the information that is given. And then the final type of question is the big picture. It's going to ask you about the passage as a whole. It may ask you about the author's perception. If that's the case, those are usually the most difficult questions. And so if that's the most difficult and you really don't understand it, do it last, but most importantly, guess. So each section of the test has questions that you're definitely going to guess on. But the do now questions, you should get right because they tell you where to go. The do later questions, you may get it right. But the do last, the big picture, don't worry about it. Guess on it if you have to. But there are enough of those get the answer type questions and the analyze based on the given info questions that you can certainly get 5 to 6 questions right for each type of passage that you read. I want you to think about that. Getting the questions right that you should is what's going to put you in a position to get that 21. You can only know what type of question you're comfortable with and you're strongest in through your practice. Now, how do you determine the order of difficulty? Here's a graph, a chart that shows you. So you can see your easy questions talk about the word and they talk about the sentence. But as you start to move over, you see a paragraph and a whole passage, you get more into reasoning type questions. These are a little bit more difficult. The comprehension questions are the ones you should get right. Focus on those questions. Focus on the comprehension questions. The reasoning questions, we don't want our score to hinge on those reasoning questions. So during practice, we got to make sure we're getting as many of the comprehension questions right as possible. Using this guide tells you what those questions are. And now you can really say, when I get to my questions, I'm doing all of the questions that tell me the line to go to. I'm doing all of the questions that tell me the paragraph to go to. I'm going to do all of these questions. You already have a game plan for the order in which you're going to navigate through the test. So how do you do this? Well, you got 4 passages, 35 minutes. That's roughly about 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage. All right. 8 minutes, 45 seconds. But what we want to do is this. We really want to only use 8 minutes total. So we want to use 3 minutes to read the passage and 5 minutes to answer 10 questions. That means you should be answering 2 questions every minute. After you read, you should be answering 2 questions every minute. If you do that, you shift 45 seconds to the end for review. Full implementation of this timing construct strategy is you will answer all 40 questions in 32 minutes, and you will shift 3 minutes for review. So when they say you got 5 minutes remaining, that really means you got 2 minutes left of answering And then you got 3 minutes to go back and review your guesses. There should not be many questions that you guess on the reading. Why? Because all of the answers are supported in the passage. But this takes practice. So what does your daily activity look like for reading? Remember, always simulate the test environment. Set your timer based on the content area. So you got one reading passage. So your timer should always be set for 8 minutes. Whenever you're doing a reading passage, during your practice session, set your timer for 8 minutes. Once you've answered all the questions, as always, find out the ones that you got correct. Find out the ones you got incorrect. Go back and see if you read the passage correctly. Go back and see if you actually read the question correctly to see if you gave them what they were looking for. And by doing that, you'll be able to set up and establish a comfortable space where you can navigate through the reading section of the ACT in 35 minutes. And you most certainly will get anywhere from 21 to possibly 24 questions correct. So we're really trying to set ourselves up to get 5 to 6 questions right out of every 10. So we're looking at 50 to 60% for every passage. May not be good for school, but it's perfect for the ACT. All right, so that's reading. And now we're at the final section, which is the science. And the science pretty much goes the same as the reading. The science pretty much goes the same as the reading. And so we start out with, what do you need to do to successfully navigate through the science? The first step with science, just like reading, you're going to identify and determine the passage type that you need to start with. Just because it's passage 1, you don't have to start there, especially if it's not the one you're most successful with during practice. Step 2, skim those passages. So again, you have to use your active reading strategy with science. Step 3, review the charts and graphs. You need to know what those charts and graphs are telling you. Can you identify trends? Do you know what they're measuring? Step 4, review the questions. All right, look at your questions. Make sure you read the question correctly so you can give them exactly what they're looking for. Once you've read the question, use the process of elimination. So you're going to be looking at those charts and graphs. You're going to be reviewing those passages to find which answers are not supported by those charts and graphs and passages. And then you're going to arrive at the correct answer. So again, here we have another step-by-step process that you're going to go through to navigate through your science content. Now, how do you determine which passage type to start with? Well, the ACT gives you, there are 3 types of passages that you're tested on. Data representation, charts and graphs, research summary, covering experiments of maybe 2, 3, or 4 students or scientists, and then conflict and viewpoints, where you got 2 individuals with alternative theories or hypotheses or viewpoints, and you got to be able to identify what it is that they are saying. So those are the 3 passage types. And as you do your practice sessions, you're going to be able to figure out which of the passage types you are getting the most answers right with. And you're going to start with that one first. So if it's experiments, experiment may be the 3rd passage, maybe 3rd and 5th passage type. Guess what? You're going to do the 3rd and the 5th passage type first. Then you can move on to the one that you're second successful with, and then the one that you're least successful with. All right. So those are your types of passages. And if you look at the types of questions, the science questions are same like the reading questions. There's some get to the answer questions. Do now. They're going to tell you to go to figure 1, table 1. They're going to tell you to go to student 1, student 2. Then you look at analyze based on information. So that's a do later type question. This is where you're going to be looking at the tables and the charts. And can you see something happening with that data? What is your interpretation of what's going on? And then number 3, generalizations and conclusions. These are the most difficult ones because they're asking you to look at the experiment or the theory as a whole and make some overall conclusion or general statement about what those scientists or authors are saying. So that's a little difficult, and you probably do that question last. And what do we do with those type of questions? Again, we guess. All right. So knowing the passage type and then identifying those types of questions, guess what? You're in a position to be successful on the ACT science. So the science part is pretty much tables, graphs, and charts. You got to be able to look at those things and read them. So in doing that, it's 3 important questions you ask yourself. What are the variables? So what is this table, chart, or graph? What is it measuring? Number 2, how are those things measured? If you're measuring speed, if it's in miles per hour, you're measuring weight. Is it in grams, percentages, quarts? So how are the variables being measured? And then number 3, what is the graph telling you? Trends. Are you able to analyze the data and interpret it and form some kind of conclusion so you can answer the question? Now, the thing is this, asking these 3 questions is so important because when you get to your questions, you're going to have to rely on these things. You're going to have to rely on the answers you get for these 3 questions to be able to answer those science questions that are posed to you. So what does an ACT science chart or graph look like? If you look at, we got one bar graph over here where we're talking about plants for sun and shade. And so we've got some things, we got the growth rate over here, we got some numbers, and then we got sun exposure. Full sun, partial shade, de-apple sun, full shade. And then it gives the elements that are being measured. So we have a table, we have a chart here, and we would use this chart to answer questions. And then if we look over here in this other table, we got study 3. So we can see that this is more or less an experiment type question. There's some data that is being shared with us, and we would have to determine the difference between study 3, study 2, and study 1. But we would have to use table 1 to get some answers. So this is what you would see on the science section of the ACT. Now, how do you get prepared for science? 6 or 7 passages. You got 40 questions. You got 35 minutes. For the conflict and viewpoint passage, you should only commit 6 minutes. For research summary passages, you should only commit 5 minutes. And for data representation, you should only commit 4 minutes. Now, the number of data representation, research summary, and conflict and viewpoints, the number of passages of each type varies. But the conflict and viewpoints, you pretty much only have one of those for the most part. So by the time you implement this strategy, it's just like reading. You would have used 32 minutes to read and answer all of the questions, and you would have shifted 3 minutes to the end for review. So when they say 5 minutes remaining, you got 2 minutes left to answer your final questions. And then you got 3 minutes to go back and review those guesses. And that's how you get through the science. So what is your plan? Again, if you're just focusing on science, always simulate the testing environment. Set your timer based on the passage type. Complete each type of passage. All right, don't just focus on one. You need to do all types, and you need to get familiar with all types. Always engage in active reading. Always use that 5-step process to answering your science questions. Score and evaluate, and then identify strengths and areas for improvement. All right, so you need some resources to be able to get this stuff done. All right, and I'm gonna finish it out shortly. The ACT Math Workout book is a great tool, and I apologize, my lawn man has shown up. The second tool that you need is the official ACT Prep Guide. Both of those books can be ordered off Amazon, and I'll show you what they look like in just a second. Number 3, prepare for ACT 2021-22 practice test. You can download that at www.act.org. And then the Pathway to 21 Masterclass. I have a pre-recorded online course that you can go in where I have each section. There are sessions that have already been recorded, so you can go back and review those sections individually. There are some additional practice tests. There's some additional content, some guides and things in there for you to use. And you can get that class. There is a fee for that course. And then there's a private Facebook group that's attached to it as well. But you can get access to the private master class at www.josephkmckee.com. And so as we close this out, I want to just tell you what it looks like if you're doing all 4 sections on a daily basis. 32 minutes for an hour session, that's what I promote. 8 minutes for English, 10 minutes for math, 8 minutes for reading, and then the science, you set it based on the passage type. Always score and evaluate your answers. Always look to identify your strengths and areas for improvement. 1 hour a day. And then finally, you cannot study content for the ACT. All right? You really can't pick up a book and study chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then come back and expect to see the same information on that test. It doesn't work that way. So the only thing you can really do is prepare for the test. Now, how do you prepare? Set your ACT goal. We all got a goal of 21. Number 2, be consistent with your prep. So everything that I've told you today, you have an hour associated with it. So I'm only saying that you need to put an hour worth of time in. Be consistent. Number 3, apply the LAB approach. That means learn the skill, learn the concept, apply it during practice, see how it works, and then build on it. So your goal is to learn, apply, and build every time you are doing something. Number 2, before you take a real deal test, if it's possible, take 2 full practice tests. Then you review, identify strengths, identify weaknesses, go and review those concepts attached to the weaknesses, and then you start it all over again. All right? And so if you need my contact information, I can be reached by email at McKee_Joseph@yahoo.com. And then my phone number is 662-579-8934. All right. So I just want to say I do apologize for the hiccups that we had today. I do apologize for the technical difficulties, but this session we're going to make this stream available to you all. I'm going to bring Ms. Cox back in so she can kind of close us out for the day. Ms. Cox, I apologize for those technical issues that we experienced, but I hope that everybody was able to take what we've shared today and find some benefit uh, to them. So the video is up on, this is on YouTube. There's an ACT with Joe, ACT Prep with Joe Facebook page that people can go and join and get access to. And I'm going to be putting tips and dropping videos on there as well. But the video is up on that site as well.
Okay. Again, thank you, Mr. McKee, for taking time out of your busy Saturday to provide these test taking strategies to our students. Again, I hope you all have learned something, and please apply these strategies the next time you take the ACT test. And remember that we are here to help. Again, my name is Trina Cox. I'm the coordinator of career services, and I'm located in the ZA Barron Student Union. If you ever need any assistance, or you can email me at tcox@kahomacc.edu, or you can call me at 662-621-4674. Again, thank you.
Okay, so I think I just typed in there, go to Facebook and find this page, ACT Prep with Joe. Go find ACT Prep with Joe on Facebook, and that way you can get connected to my private group. And if you download those practice tests, inside of that group, you can post questions in there for me, and I don't have a problem coming into the group and going over an example and showing you how to solve it and arrive at the answer. And we can use these tips and strategies inside of that group. So I'm available to each and every last one of you. Go join that group, that page, and let's get you all on the pathway to 21. So I thank you all for your time. Hope everybody has enjoyed and found value in what we've shared today. And until next time, everybody just learn, apply, and build, and chart your path to 21. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.